If you are on Facebook Live, you can just comment. We have people monitoring that as well. And if you're in Zoom, you can also raise your hand. And the way you raise your hand on the computer is you hit the participants button that's on a computer, and there's a hand raising feature. And if you're on a phone, I think it's under the three dots menu. If you're on an iPad, I'm not sure because I haven't looked at that interface. You can raise your hand, and then me or one of my colleagues will let you unmute you in that moment. And so my plan is that I'll stop every now and again between kind of sections to ask for questions, at which point you can either raise your hand, or if you've typed something in, my colleagues will prompt me for what people are asking. Jeff and Kyle are the two people that you may hear pipe up, as well as me and my colleagues from Dynon. And so at this point, before I get started, we're going to try something that might be a mistake, but we'll try it anyways. And that is, we're going to unmute everybody at once. I just want to know, what are some things that you want me to cover? So if we can do the unmute all, Jeff.
All right, everybody's unmuted.
All right.
God save us all.
And so, what I have here, by the way, is a SkyView HDX panel. It's set up in the Dynon certified configuration, but the really, I can very well demonstrate other systems I can answer questions about. But is there any particular thing that anybody was hoping to learn? Give me topics that you really want to make sure I cover.
So what's it about?
He's got a navigation gear. His whole panel is different to what mine ever was.
Yeah.
Mike, it looks like it's hard for people to hear you, so I'm going to mute everybody back.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right.
People to hear.
So people can't hear.
Yeah.
All right, Mike,
All
you're
right.
back.
Okay,
we have several questions coming in from the Zoom chat.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll just get. Is there anything to know about right now, or should I just start?
You should just go ahead and start in. We looks like we have some questions about autopilot approvals, some classic questions maybe.
Mike, you mentioned where they can go online to vote for their airplane on our certified website as far as the autopilot question goes. I'll put a link.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about certified and autopilot and approvals. People are asking, but if we don't have your airplane approved for the autopilot, we have almost 600 models of piston singles approved without autopilot on the certified side. But if we don't have your model with autopilot, you go to dynoncertified.com. There's a big button at the top that says add my plane, and that's almost a voting mechanism. You register your name, email address, what airplane you have, and we actually do use that when we do our periodic review of what autopilot approval we're going for next. So definitely take advantage of that. So I'm just going to kind of start down the from the top down. So me, I'm Michael Scofield. I've been at Dynon for just over 15 years now. So if you've been to Oshkosh or Sun and Fun or Aero, we've certainly met before, hopefully. And I'm a pilot. I've been a pilot since 2006. I'm still pretty low time, VFR only myself. I fly a Glass Air Sportsman that I co-own with about 8 other Dynonians. And admittedly, I need to go fly it a little bit more. And I'm our director of marketing. I also do a lot of product management. So I'm kind of in between the salesy marketing side and the product development side. So what we're going to do now is we're going to flop over to, I have as I mentioned, a SkyView HDX panel. And I'm just going to take you through, how to use it. Let me spotlight the other video.
There you go.
All right, so here's SkyView HDX, and it looks like it's pretty clear right now. Hopefully, it stays that way. And so, what is SkyView? I mean, I hope you probably already know that it's an integrated avionics system that can basically do everything, right? So it's your flight instruments, it's your engine instruments, it's your moving map, it's your navigation and flight planning. Autopilot, ADSB out, transponder, ADSB in, traffic and weather, comm radio. It can integrate with third-party IFR navigators for IFR flight. It's redundant. We have backup instruments that go with it, especially if you're in Dynon certified, you'll have one of our EFIS D10A units to back up the SkyView system. And I guess I already talked about what the overview of what it can do are. What I like to do, if you came up to the booth and said, show me SkyView, the thing I like to do is to show you how it works in just a couple of minutes. So SkyView HDX is a touch screen, so lots of things are touchable, like the moving map. And one thing we really like to point out is that although it's a touch screen and we can touch things for menus and to control, we can do almost everything both with the touch screen and with the buttons and knobs. In fact, SkyView HDX has this, it's hard to see in this lighting, but this angled bezel, which in turbulence, which we all know in a small airplane, in anything more than light turbulence, it can kind of be hard to steady your arm when it's outstretched. So we have this beveled button board here, and also little rails on the sides to let you anchor yourself there. So everything can be done with touch and hard buttons and knobs. And here are kind of like the 2 or 3 things you need to know to do basically everything on SkyView HDX. So one, if you want to reconfigure the display, what's being shown on the display, that's the display button. So if I wanted to say go to full screen flight instruments, or most of the screen flight instruments, we could say display full. Or if I want to split the screen with map, I could say display map. And that brings us to the map. So that's sort of reconfiguring the display. If I want to do anything features, use the transponder, autopilot, comm radio. Menu is all of the things that you use, the controls, and all of your preferences and adjustments, whether you want to change the way the map looks, or whether weather is displayed, or how your PFD, 6-pack or not, whether synthetic vision's on or not, all that's under menu. So these 2 buttons are basically your gateway to all of the power of SkyView. The buttons on the left, these are all kind of map and flight planning oriented. They're kind of obvious, what they do. This is flight plan, brings up your flight plan. Nearest is actually probably the thing I use most here because it brings up your nearest airports and other things. We'll get into more of the map stuff, but these 4 buttons are very map oriented. And then we have 2 knobs, which both rotate and click. So the one closest to the map is going to zoom in and zoom out. If we pan around and say, choose another point, or touch an airport, clicking that map knob will recenter on the aircraft. And then on the knob that's closest to the primary flight instruments is going to adjust the things that are part of the primary flight instrument suite. So if we click the knob, we can get a menu for your heading bug, your altitude bug, your baro setting, or we can just touch those things. Let's say airspeed here, and then rotate to change the airspeed or altitude. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. So that's really kind of the core of everything you need to know. Oh, one other thing. So I just showed you mostly the knob and button interface. On the touch screen, things that you think you can touch that you might want to control, you can. So we already talked about the map. It's pretty obvious. We all have tablets these days. We know how a moving map works. You can pinch to zoom, or you can use the knob. But also everything on the top bar here, all of that's touchable because these are all the things that you can control. So if I want to adjust the autopilot, I just touch that area near the autopilot or anywhere on that bar, and autopilot controls pop up. Transponder, clock, and timers. In fact, I was supposed to start myself a clock here, so I'm going to. This is we're kind of getting to near an hour, kind of clean it up or finish it up, Mike. By the way, I'm happy to stick around for as long as anybody wants. This goes from 4 to 5, but like most of you, I don't have anywhere to be. So happy to field your questions until you run out. Comm radio on the upper right here. So that's sort of a 2 to 3 or maybe 5 minute overview of how to use SkyView. The right button is always the alert and message center. So if it says caution, that means there's some kind of caution. This demo panel needs a compass calibration, so you wouldn't go flying before you do that. If there's an alert, it'll be red. If it's just trying to give you some other message, which is an urgent nature, it would be white and just say message. So let's see, I think I won't take questions right just yet. I'm going to move on to what I'm going to do next is I'm going to address each feature and functional area of SkyView and just kind of take you through them. And again, as if we were at the booth and you said, I don't really know much about SkyView. Show me what it's got. So first up, the primary thing that you're buying, or the most primary thing, is a set of primary flight instruments. So I'll make that full screen. And this is our PFD. It's pretty configurable, but fundamentally, and in fact, even before I talk about what's on the screen, a pretty common thing we'll hear that we heard for years is, hey, I really like the idea of technology, but I've been flying steam gauges for decades. I'm not sure if I could really adjust to this. We actually have a way now to bring up what we call the 6-pack display. We can even turn the synthetic vision off. So here you've got your very conventional looking instruments, the 6-pack. And what people have done is that if they're not immediately comfortable with the glass cockpit, the EFIS display, you start here and then you self-train, in the sense that you could just go and with a couple of button clicks turn off the 6-pack and get yourself acquainted to it at your own pace. So you all know what those instruments look like and what they do. Here's how primary flight display in a modern glass cockpit looks like. I'm just kind of sweep across the screen. So this is indicated airspeed. It's got the colored arc equivalent on a steam gauge. This is the green, sort of kind of in cruise speed range. There's the white bar, the partial white bar for flaps, and all of that. Below it, because we have GPS on board and outside air temperature, we're always telling you what true airspeed is, and right below it, we're telling you what the ground speed is based on GPS. Because again, we know what direction you're flying and what direction you're pointed and how fast you're making good over the ground. We can tell you what your crosswind component is. So that's sort of all the airspeed oriented things. At the top of the airspeed tape, this is the indicated airspeed bug. This is something used as just something as a reminder, or if you have the autopilot, you can fly different airspeeds. So you can climb out at 100 knots, for example, and the autopilot will handle that. Attitude indicator, angle of attack is, if you have the optional angle of attack pitot probe, is shown on the screen. Although, frankly, I don't look at this much because there's a really awesome audible call out or tone that, as you do your round out and flare, once you have it calibrated, it's kind of a cross between a Geiger counter and a Cessna stall warning, in that it kind of starts. It increases in frequency as you get closer to your critical angle of attack or stall. So it's kind of like beep, 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 up to a tone. So visually, as your angle of attack increases, this bar disappears. So coming across, here's your attitude indicator. The yellow is sort of the airplane reference. You have a couple of pips on the outside so you can, so that you're well oriented across the horizon. You've got your roll indicator, and this is basically what you'd expect. These two little cyan marks are the bank angle you would need to attain at your current speed to perform a 2-minute turn. So if you're flying IFR and you're told to turn, you're always supposed to be doing your 2-minute turns. You just put the yellow on the cyan as you bank. Let's demonstrate that. So as we bank in, this would be a 2-minute turn right now. I've just exceeded it. Other things kind of in the center column, that's the slip skid ball. It works just like you think it would. You step on the ball, it's powered by the inertial sensors inside of SkyView sensor box. And then down here, this is heading. So it's actual magnetic heading that we're sensing. It's not GPS. However, what's really nice is because we have all kinds of sensors in SkyView, it's not just, it doesn't lead or lag. You can think of it as a gyro stabilized or an inertial platform stabilized heading indicator. So it's basically always measuring heading, but as you turn and as you roll, you're not getting those lead lag effects that you would have on your compass. This is a DG, kind of compass card representation. It's also your HSI. So right now it's depicting some external GPS's course guidance. If I tap this little info widget here again, this is now it's a nav radio, a VOR. If I adjust the course, eventually I will center the needle just as you'd expect. There we go. So the course is 222. or I can just, and I can also do SkyView's navigation as well. So I'll just very quickly do that. Your Sky, I just very quickly did a direct to somewhere, and now it's depicting that. This is your heading bug. That's your course bug. If you're on GPS, the course is implicitly defined by the flight plan. There's also a turn rate indicator, which is this kind of black arc. And so if I initiate a turn, it's going to kind of snap to it. But that little magenta bar right there kind of grows in proportion to your turn rate. So right now at that second tick mark, which you may not be able to see, that's a 2-minute turn as well. So you can have two representations of that, both up here and down there in terms of the 2-minute turn. Moving over to the altitude tape, that's altitude. That's the altitude bug, which you use to fly autopilot. That's the altimeter setting. We can, for example, touch that and then adjust using the knob. If we're on the ground and don't have ADS-B weather, we could also just click and hold it, and it will sync to the elevation because we know what airport you're at because we have the data for that. But if you're in the air and you're receiving ADS-B weather, we kind of know what the nearest reporting station is. So as you're flying cross country, you don't ever really need to listen to ATIS or ASOS. You just kind of press and hold the altimeter or the barrow knob, and it just said it's synchronized to KBVS, which is Skagit Bayview in the Seattle area. So that's altitude. It's actually people don't always notice this. This little magenta bar is altitude. It's a 6-second altitude trend. It's where you'll be in 6 seconds based on your current vertical speed. The actual vertical speed indicator is just off to the right. It's saying we're climbing at 1,500 feet per minute right now. If I just kind of adjust that in this demo mode, it kind of flies whatever we set the bug to, kind of like autopilot. So pretty easy to glance your vertical speed. Also density altitude, great for your performance calculations, although with many home builds, it barely matters with say an RV, but it's there, especially for certified aircraft, which we're now in. Outside air temperature, which is useful, of course. Density altitude folds that in, but it's nice to know how warm or cold it is outside. And down here, there's a couple of bearing indicators that you can put up as well. I don't think I'll get into that right now. And then behind the instruments, we have the synthetic vision that's got worldwide data. There's high resolution databases if you live outside of the US that you would load when you get your unit. It's got water and airports. You can see there's a runway in the distance there. There are flags for the airports. So I think it's Bravo Victor Sierra, that's Skagit Bayview that we had just tuned the weather to, is just up ahead. And so you get those little flags that are helpful there. There's also, let's see, I don't know if I could demo it quick enough. Synthetic vision, yeah, so that yellow in the synthetic vision is telling us that there is, that you're on course to intercept terrain. If it's yellow, it's kind of like, watch out. If it's red, you really need to take action. Similarly, there are obstacles, and so here we're kind of flying out of Payne Field just up in Everett, and there's a whole bunch of towers and structures. And this is the obstacle database, the same obstacles you would see on the chart, and that you will also see on the map. Those little red and yellow things show up in synthetic vision. So again, red is you're on a collision course roughly for it, and yellow is it's kind of below you but not too far, and then they disappear entirely when they're not there. Let's see. So that is the PFD overview. I guess I'll take a quick break. Are there any questions? If you have a question, raise your hand. And
Mike, we've got one person with their hand raised. We've got a ton of questions in the chat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let John ask his question because he's had his hand up. And then after that's over, Kyle's going to, he's been kind of going through the questions and he's going to feed you a few. So, John, I'm going to unmute you and lower your hand if you want to ask Mike your question. You may have to click OK on the unmute. John, are you there?
I'm here. I think I'm here.
Yep. We can hear you.
This is real simple. I own a Vashon Ranger. So I've got an HDX.
Yeah.
And actually I have one. And I've flown in some airplanes with earlier Dynon units, but it's different. And the thing I've noticed, and my big question is, are you going to do comprehensive training videos for the HDX like there are now for the older systems?
Yeah, that's a good question. The answer is yes, and we started publishing those. We've had the first few, which are We did one on Comm Radio. We did one on, what's the other topic? I'm blanking.
Panel.
There's
yeah,
one on the panel, sort of
the non-panel
overview one. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's also, there is an intro to SkyView HDX on our YouTube channel that has kind of the basics, sort of what I just took you through. And actually these videos, especially the ones that are a little more webinar style, this is more kind of a booth style, we'll archive these, and those will be good training videos as well. So the answer is yes. I think it'll actually be probably in a better, more concise format than the, we have like a 2-hour class, which is actually really quite good for SkyView Classic. And many of the principles are the same. The user interface is a little bit different with HDX. In fact, some of the things on SkyView Classic that maybe require a little bit of learning are pretty intuitive on SkyView HDX. And actually, even by the time I get through this presentation today, you're probably going to have most of it. But the answer is yes. We'll be doing more there, publishing more structured videos that are particular to HDX and other parts of the SkyView system. Good question.
Okay, because it's I've had it now. It's been since last July, and I'm a neophyte. Okay, I turn a lot turn a lot off because I don't know how to use it, and it's too distracting in the air. So
totally.
So I have to sit in the hangar with the charger on and play.
And another, so we're going to keep doing these videos all throughout the year and even beyond, because we're finding them super effective. And one thing we're playing with is actually having more of an instructional class thing. So this is kind of like a demo, but I'm trying to make it sort of educational, trying to show you how things work as well, and not just make it a complete sales pitch. But another topic that we have in the hopper to do one of these is kind of like HDX basics or advanced HDX.
Okay,
so that's a
keep me in mind.
All right. Great. We got a couple more hands up, Mike, if you want to take a couple more questions.
Yeah, sounds good. How about Steve? Oh.
Steve, I'm going to unmute you.
Hello?
And there you are.
Oh, hi. Thanks for doing this first off. But I have two questions, and they're about two pieces of the HDX that either I can't figure out or it's not installed. But does the unit not share any air data Z formats to to the navigators, like to my IFD 440? Because in my my original Grand Rapids would actually share that data to my 430, and I get performance at each waypoint and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it does share over the ARINC connection a variety of data, and I forget which, I don't have on the top of my head which labels or which data fields it shares. I thought air data was one of the ones that was pretty comprehensively shared. I don't have anybody from our tech support team on hand that I just don't have at the top of my head. So I believe the answer is yes. And there's a chance that we don't do every last one. So there might be like a couple of gaps, but I would expect that anything that you had coming out of, a different product, as you said years ago, that we'd also be outputting. And you had another question?
I accidentally muted him, Mike, and did he come back?
I think the data comes actually across a serial port. I don't think it comes across a air data, but I mean 429 bus. But my second question is there any plans for a flight log? That's something I really miss.
Yeah, it's on our feature list. It's not in the next version for sure. There are some maintenance logging features now, things like oil change, and there's also weight and balance calculator. But there isn't a straight up sort of here was the last flight, or the last series of flights that you can download into like an Excel or CSV file. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Okay, I wanted to actually, because as I mentioned, I share my airplane with a bunch of other people, and it would just be nice for us to just be able to grab the log and match it up to our paper sign out sheet.
Exactly.
So totally.
Or download it, either one.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Let's see.
Do you want to take one more?
Yeah, I'll take one more. Lawrence looks like has his hand up.
Lawrence, you're unmuted. Lawrence? Lawrence, you there? Lawrence Smiley?
All right. I'm going to lower his hand and let's mute him.
Okay.
All right, so so I'm going to move on to the next section, which is, let's see, I guess it's HSI. Well, I already talked a little bit about it. I'll talk a little bit more about the HSI, but then I'm going to talk about engine monitoring. So the HSI is, let's see, let me just spotlight myself.
Mike, one of the questions that's come up in the comments a couple of times is about interfacing with Ifr Navigators.
Yeah, perfect.
And that plays into the HSI if you want to go over,
Yeah.
mention that in the process.
Yeah, perfect. So, yeah, so when you are, so the HSI, think of the HSI as the thing that, shows you course and deviation. It's also the thing that feeds the autopilot. So whatever is showing up on your HSI is what the autopilot's going to fly. So, and then the HSI, as I mentioned, can be just a DG, or by tapping the info field, it can show you, this is SkyView's internal flight plan with distance to the next waypoint and what that is. If we have a third-party navigator connected, it will also show you, that guidance. So here, this is called GPS2. You could rename it. So if you have an Avidyne, you can call it like IFD 540. You can put in that data field, for example. And it shows you, again, what the scale of what the scale of the CDI is. In here case is saying 5 nautical miles. And if there's a glide path or glide slope, that'll show up as well from any device, including now SkyView's internal flight planning now has some basic vertical guidance down to runways or pattern altitude. But coming soon is a more robust vertical planning, which is actually pretty cool. And then if you have a nav radio connected, this would be, as I mentioned, a VOR course, VOR, or if it's an ILS, you'd see the glide slope as well. And so what devices can you connect? So you can connect basically any of the modern GPS, Navcom, boxes. So of course, we're a little bit biased, so the Avidyne IFD series actually has a really great user interface. So a lot of people are equipping with those when they choose Dynon. It'll also work with the Garmin, the GNS, like the 430, 530, the GTNs, and then the newer GPS 175 and 355. All of those are all compatible. They're all similar from an interface perspective. And so, and then if you are flying IFR, that's, I guess the one piece of this of the panel that we don't make ourselves is the certified IFR navigator. So, Dynon's, our flight planning is super robust. And actually, if you're not flying IFR, you're going to find yourself preferring using our map because it's so easy to use. When you do go IFR, you'll use that third-party navigator. We have a mock-up of one here, and then you fly the HSI. You use, and also you can echo that flight plan on our map as well, so we can show you graphically the holds and the waypoints and things like that. That basically covers, and I did mention earlier on there are, let's see, the bearing sources. There we are. So if this is saying, so I toggled bearing 1 to SkyView and bearing 2 to GPS2. So now we have, both our course deviation. I'll cycle this back to SkyView. So we know that the SkyView, waypoint is up there. We're a little off track. Let me just actually turn off the HSI entirely. But here we have our bearing to the SkyView waypoint is, that first one with 1 tick and then 2 ticks to the external GPS. So we have that as well. Reversing just a minute, because I really forgot, the PFD, there are a bunch of things that you can configure. One is the 6-pack. I showed that. Synthetic vision you can turn off if really good for flight training. If you just want to kind of narrow down the scope of what somebody's paying attention to, you can change whether the synthetic vision is wide or narrow. There's a G meter that you can pull up as well instead of the DG. You can turn off terrain alerting and other things like that. Let's see, did I cover everything on HSI? So do you have any other questions specific to, because again, I'm happy to take endless questions about any part of the system, but kind of want to keep it contained to, do we have any other questions about the HSI or kind of the navigator integration, anything on that? Bill, I'll unmute you. All right. There's no bill. All right.
I'm sorry.
Oh. Yeah. What can I tell you?
My questions are more about Autopilot, and I'll wait till you get to that section.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yep. All right. So next up, we've got engine monitoring. So what does it monitor? Everything. So everything engine and everything. In fact, we call it engine monitoring, but it's sort of like engine and aircraft monitoring. So there are a bunch of, so first of all, where does it show up? One is, of course, what we call the bottom band. When you're setting it up, if you're in a home built and you kind of have discretion, and all of this is configurable, by the way. So if you don't like the way this looks, with a couple of button clicks, you can etch a sketch your the placement of gauges. You can change the style. I'll demonstrate that in just a few minutes. But what do we have? We've got fuel quantity, so left and right tanks. We do more than that, but typical airplane only has two. Your manifold pressure, tachometer, fuel flow, fuel pressure, oil temperature, oil pressure, all four of your CHTs and EGTs, your batteries and volts, and then aircraft-oriented stuff like trim and flaps. There's also all kinds of performance calculations, including percent horsepower that works for kind of Lycoming Continental superior engines that aren't exotic, that have normal compression pistons. Once you get outside of the norm, it's really using sort of the digital equivalent of the chart that you would use in the back of your engine manual to tell you what the percent horsepower is. We also have, this is kind of cool, we do have a lean assist mode, but frankly, I never use it because we have real-time lean, rich, or peak detection. So you don't have to actually be moving the mixture. We have kind of a clever algorithm that's all secret proprietary that knows, once you have it set up, whether you're lean, rich, or at peak on your EGTs at any given time. Doesn't matter where your mixture is set or where your throttle set, it just knows. Hobbs and Tack timer. This is the fuel computer saying negative 106 gallons remaining. Our demo mode sometimes makes funny numbers. The bottom bar on SkyView HDX is where you'd see it primarily. If you're setting it up, you want to keep all of your primary stuff on this left side. It could also be the right, but let's say this side, because you can make the map with this little button here bigger to pave over the other side. So this is kind of the core, the legal flight instruments, or at least the ones I care about the most. But you can kind of pave over them temporarily. We can also display the engine as a 50% split screen. So here I've got, again, those core instruments, and but I have my CHTs and EGTs not combined in this display, but as separate. Batteries, volts, those the trim, which you can do all three axes, flaps, which you can configure. It doesn't have to be 0 to X. You can give it intermediate steps as well. All kinds of customizable things for pitot heat or canopy. And then what we have up here on the upper right, these are the fuel computer widgets and fuel computer related things. So kind of to talk about the distinction between fuel quantity and fuel computer. Fuel quantity is these guys here. They're direct measurement from the tank senders. So whether you have resistive floats or capacitive tank sensors, even if you have, let's say, even if you were retrofitting a certified airplane and don't touch the floats, and your fuel gauges in your 172 have always been terrible. Once you put in SkyView and you go through the calibration, we can see that, if you add, if for, let's say, a tank which is shaped all kinds of weirdly oblong, it might be the case that the float kind of moves a little bit, then a lot, or actually it's right, it's a lot, then a little bit, then a lot again as you go through that kind of that oddly shaped tank. We can calibrate to that so that when it says 10, there's 10. And if you're over the top of what the sensor can measure, it'll say 10 plus. Let's say you hold 15, but your sensor tops out at 10. So it doesn't lie to you. It's good throughout the range, and that's great. But also we have a fuel computer, and what the fuel computer utilizes is the fuel flow sensor. So you've got your fuel flow, so 1.8 gallons per hour. You can also have a gauge if you'd like as well. And the way it works is when you fill up or change the fuel state of the airplane, you go to engine tools and then fuel, and now you can adjust how much fuel is in the airplane, or you could just say full, or if you have tabs or some alternate fuel state, like my Sportsman has 4 tanks, but we only ever fill 2, and so that's the preset, versus full is when you top off for cross country. And then you say accept, and then you set the fuel computer. You actually don't even need to do that. You don't need to go to that menu, because there is a setting that when you fill up and you fire up SkyView when you start up, it's going to say, ooh, I saw these change. I bet you want to adjust the fuel computer, and it prompts you to do that. Once you have fuel on board and we know fuel flow, then we sort of have a countdown, like how much gallons are used and how many are remaining based on just the flow alone. We can also tell you, because we have GPS, things like how many miles per gallon you're making over the ground. That's really fun to see when you've got like a crazy tailwind. Your waypoint, your gallons at your next waypoint, your range till empty, and that updates like in real time. So if as you lean out, like that number is going to go super high up when you're on climb out, and you are guzzling fuel, like that, your range is actually scarily short. Of course, you can't climb forever, and you have to you change your configuration. All kinds of other timers, and so that's the fuel computer. All of your EGTs and CHTs, as I mentioned, there is a lean assist mode, which tells you how cooler you are than peak. It's hard to demonstrate in this, and I don't want to get too much. There's also, if you're into it, there's the GAMI spread, which tells you the difference in fuel flow between your different EGTs as they peak. That's useful for tuning your fuel injectors and getting an engine that's well balanced. That if you are a member of the Church of Lean of Peak, you want to have them, your fuel injectors really well balanced. Oh, here, by the way, is the terrain alerting, right? We're kind of scooting along. We're basically skating along terrain right now. So it's saying, hey, that red stuff, watch out, you're hitting it or going to hit it. And we're now going through the ground. Let's see, did I miss anything critical on the engine monitor? You can, if I change the display configuration, I can make the engine monitor my primary thing, let's say with a second display, and make that full screen, and boom, now we have a full screen engine monitor. And then just real quick, I'll jump into setup mode and just show you how easy it is. If I go to setup mode and go to engine monitor setup, and I go to the screen layout editor and that 100% page that we're staring at, and I go to the sensor, and let's just change the oil temperature sensor. And so I can move it around, or I can change the style. Maybe I want it to be just a number, and how big do I want that number to be? So boom, oil temperature. So you can make everything just a row of numbers. Our brains all work differently in terms of how we interpret information, and you could adjust to your preferences. Oh, also there's a robust learning system. So you can see right now CHT1 is in the red zone. So like if you just scan and you see like the solid red, like that's going to be pretty obvious. Also, there's audible alerting, and for the things that we know what they are, that everybody has, like RPM or oil pressure, it'll say, oil pressure high or CHT high in a voice, and that's the thing that I'm usually paying attention to. Of course, you should always be scanning your panel, but it's nice to have the audible alert there remind you. If you did get an alert, this would go from saying message to red. It'll say alert, I think it is, and then you'll get the warning there. That's also helpful. You can set alerts to be what we call self-clearing, which means that like when the alert fires, it's there, and when it's gone, it's gone. And that makes sense for maybe some things like an EGT where it's transient, but there are things that maybe you actually want to know what the alert was. Even once it's gone, let's say there's a high workload moment and a bunch of things were going wrong. And if you set what we call a latching alarm, that alert will still be under this button and under here until you acknowledge it. So that's helpful there too. Yeah, trims 3 axes, you're only seeing elevator here. Any questions? I think that's kind of the core of the engine monitoring stuff. Do we have any questions on engine monitoring?
Mike, we got a couple questions. It looks like Ken's got his hand up. We've also got a couple questions in the chat about engine monitoring that have just come in. Let's take Ken first. I'm going to unmute him and let him ask you your question.
Okay. Hello there.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah. Well, I am about 90% done integrating an IFD 540 with my SkyView system. It's in a home build. And I've learned the mysteries of air ink buses and all kinds of other things far, far more than I ever wanted to know. But in an Avidyne forum last week, I asked a chat question and I got an answer, and I would really like to get you to confirm or deny. Specifically, we all know that fuel flow information exists on the SkyView network, coming from the totalizer.
Yep.
And my question was, do the fuel calculation functions of the IFD function with, does the IFD see that fuel flow information over the network?
Yeah, I think it should. Let's see. Give me 1 second here. I want to have the one piece of information because it's been like 2 questions now. Let's see. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So like my honest answer is I'm not sure. I don't have the instant answer there. I think I'm not sure whether fuel flow is one of the transmitted labels. So I can't answer that here.
Part of the reason for asking the question is I asked a chat question a little earlier in the session as to when the 2 engines on one screen will cease to be vaporware and actually get out into amongst the real world. Yeah. And I was hoping that I have a multi-engine home built.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to feed all that. And if you guys can't give me 2 engines on one screen, I can at least consolidate my fuel information on the IFD.
Gotcha. So it is. So the next certified airplane that is about to be certified, in the coming weeks. Let's just say, weeks might be. It's not 2 and it isn't 50, right? But soon. But the Seneca is the Piper Seneca, and that feature is coming online because it needs to for the Piper Seneca. Initially, it might not make it into the experimental. Our software is kind of being branched or forked for at least a little while. Things will come back together, but so know that it does exist. It is vaporware in the sense that you can't get it right now. And then there are people that do have the existing twin engine interface and kind of have a migration path there as well. So so the answer is yes, soon, and I can't give you an exact time frame, but that's going to happen because it's already implemented on the certified side and going through the testing as we wrap up the work on the Seneca.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
Looks like we have Lawrence is back. We can try to get his question.
All right, let's do that.
Lawrence, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, super. I'm putting a 915 IS Rotax on a Long Easy, and the question is, with all your engine monitoring, can you take the signals off of the Rotax engine and display them on your EFIS?
Yeah, which Rotax engine do you have?
915 IS, the new one.
Yeah, and that is the new enough that I think we still need to do like a formal tech review just to make sure that everything works the same as it does with the 912 IS. It does have a turbocharger, and I don't think there's anything else that this is kind of on my list to research myself. I don't think there's any.
At iSkosh last year, it was still up in the air, and so I was hoping I'd like to get mine in the air by this summer. So that's
my 90% answer is it is supported because it's basically the same as the 912 IS.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Looks like we have one more, Zach.
Right, go for it. Cool.
Zach, I just unmuted you. You should be there.
Hello?
Are you there, Zach?
How are you? Yep, we got you.
Yeah, quick question, 2 questions, and maybe you're already going to talk about it in a little bit, but the first one around the engine monitoring is, for those of us that already have, let's say like a JPI or something, do we have to replace the existing sensors that have been installed there, or is that, compatible with your system?
Right, yeah, good question. So the expensive ones, or at least the ones that add up, the CHTs and EGTs are generally compatible. Any type J or K thermocouple, and we use type Js for CHT and type Ks for EGTs, but you can actually use them either way, will work with our system. Then the other ones, so you've got oil temperature, oil pressure, fuel pressure. Generally, there's not a lot of compatibility when it comes down to like, what are those sensors, and it's even hard to sometimes ID them, like what they really are in terms of it being like, so we don't support, let's say, like JPI sensors, but if they happen to use the same sensors that we've used, then they can work. But what you can do, what most people do in your situation, is you kind of keep the CHTs and EGTs, the fuel flow sensors are basically universal. So whether you have a flow scan or an EI, that'll work. And then the 3 or 4 others, you end up buying from us.
Like TIT stuff.
Oh, say again?
Like TIT and other stuff.
Yeah. And those are, so TIT is usually a thermocouple as well, like an EGT. So if it is a thermocouple, then it'll work as well.
Okay, got it. And then second question, and you may get to it. And so I have a TR-182. So curious on obviously the Autopilot certification timeline, and the full certified suite for that.
Yeah, so Autopilot is basically, so we have, and let's see, do we have your airplane on the AML? Do you know?
Mike, it looks like he may have muted himself back.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll give the general answer. So we have like 600 airplanes, and I'm not sure if yours is on it or not on the approved model list. And Autopilot, because it involves like changing airframe structure and rigging and stuff like that, we have to do that airplane by airplane. It's not like home built land where we can just say, here are servos, go fashion your own mounting hardware. It just doesn't fly. So we do have to do that airplane by airplane. And the list of airplanes that we're working on right now are the only ones we're really committing to, because we've been wrong, frankly, over the past few years in terms of timelines. So we don't, and we're even hesitant to give like precise dates because things change. This whole COVID thing has slowed things down a little bit. All of that. So right now, it's the Seneca, then the 182, then the Mooney M20. Sorry, it's the Seneca, then the Bonanza A36 series, the Mooney 182, then the Mooney M20, and I think that's the last one we have committed to. A very strong candidate for the next one are the Piper PA28 series, just because there's so many of them. And that form I mentioned on our website, which we do use, not exclusively, but it's one of the things we weight. It's how many people are interested, and we're also looking at a whole bunch of other factors as well. So my honest answer is I can't give you an answer if it's not on the list. So,
it looks like he's back now. Zach, you're back.
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, the aircraft in question is a Cessna 182 RG TR-182. So I assume that's
okay. Yes. And okay, so yeah, the 182 is after the so it's Seneca, and they're not completely serial. There's work happening on them, but it will be one after the other. So it's Seneca, Bonanza A36, 182. The 182 we think. This is, kind of a big, but with like, I don't know, 70% certainty should cover much of the range. But what happens is we go through the engineering and then we start getting our hands on engineering drawings for different models. We can either prove or disprove that. I don't think we have a comprehensive model list, but I think ours is an RG, like the actual mule that we have in the shop. I think that's a retractable. So that's good news.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. All right.
Looks like we have one more. You want to take one more?
Let's take one more, and then I'm gonna move along.
Then okay, Bill Putney.
It's me. So there are a bunch of airplanes on the AML that are kind of low population airplanes, and of course mine is an Avion, which is a relatively low population airplane. We've had autopilots on these airplanes for about 60 years now. 70 years now. And so a lot of these airplanes are flying around with S-Tech, Century, 35 different sorts of autopilots that all have mounts that have the same hole pattern as the Dynon servos.
Yeah.
And the rigging should be the same, and the structure is already there, and has anybody thought about like working with the FAA and saying, well, how about something where if there's already an existing autopilot, you know, and it's just a matter of swapping out the servos that we can find some shortcut way of doing that, because there's some of us, you know, that, you know, I understand that the constraints, but there's some of us who will never see a Dynon autopilot.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't encountered that yet in terms of, you know, once we actually kind of get into an airplane, you know, it's like, well, actually we need to engineer new brackets and whatnot. We're all about finding the quickest way to get something to market though. So if we actually, if like, as you said, if the Navion, it's basically, if it's more or less a bolt-in or like an adaptation of an existing autopilot installation, that could be a much quicker path forward. And the Navion, admittedly, it's kind of a low volume, but you guys are, there's a couple of communities around certain airplanes that are particularly strong, and that even when we think about them, they get overweighted in terms of, let's say, the population of airplanes. And again, population isn't the only thing. It's also kind of, you know, community, desire, all that kind of stuff. So like one is the Navion community. You guys are, you know, we hear a lot from Navion owners in terms of desiring an autopilot. Another one's the Cessna Cardinal. You know, we did an Oshkosh forum just for Cardinal owners because they, you know, brought the whole club in and everything. So that's not a promise, you know, but it's sort of like yes, like we know that it's not just the, you know, the Piper PA-28s are autopilot eligible. And as you said, there might be some quicker paths forward on some of these models.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, I'm going to move on. Let's see, where's my topic list? All right, so we're going to talk about, we'll talk about map, moving map. And let's see. Okay, good, the panel's back. All right, moving map. As I said, like, you know, if you are flying IFR, you're going to pair us with a navigator, but even if you do have one of those navigators, when you're not flying IFR, you're going to use our map. And it basically works like you would expect a map to for looking around. It's you know, just like, you know, like everything that we have on our phone and iPad. You know, there's the airplane. There's where we're going to be 10 minutes and some minutes, or 10 miles and some minutes from where we are. We've got airports. We've got fixes and other things. This is configured right now with a demo of ADS-B weather. So if I zoom out, you can see we've got some mountains. We also have some thunderstorm activity. We have that weather color encoded actually. So the green dot at Payne Field here, that's saying that there's that the weather's good there, even though it wasn't so great just off to the west. If we want information about something, we can just tap it. We get kind of the stuff you might want to know about, like field elevation, traffic pattern, altitude, estimated if it isn't in the data as it isn't for some complicated airports. If where I touch on the screen, you know, so it's saying that's an airport, if there's more than one thing that I might be touching because there's, you know, kind of layers of things stacked, in this case, there's airspace, I can touch this little arrow and it's saying, oh, there's Everett's Class D. Let me zoom out to show that. So if we touch, and then there's the airport that's highlighted. Now we're highlighting Payne Field's Class D that goes surface to 3,100 feet. If I touch it again, we've got, because Seattle's kind of a busy area, airspace-wise, we've got a Class Bravo, which is 6,000 to 7,000 feet. So just orienting yourself, that's, you know, this is frankly just a ton easier than it is on most other things where you have to kind of like touch something, then hit a menu, then pull up a list of airspaces. You know, if I say like, oh, there's some kind of a restricted area that's restricted surface to 1,900. So pretty easy to just navigate around. If you prefer north up or track up, you can just touch the arrow. In this case, I guess we're flying basically the same way. But if I want track up, which means, just to be clear, that means that the direction of the map is in front of the airplane and not necessarily north. If we want north up, now it's like you're holding a chart in your hand where north is north and things look like they do. Zooming in and zooming out, you can do with your fingers, or you can use the knob. We can zoom way out and, you know, get across the country really quickly. In fact, if I just want to go fly, you know, so I live in Seattle, but you know, I'm from New Jersey, so Newark, I could just say direct to, and off we go. And now I have super quickly, and it does all the great circle routing. You know, so it's taking the least distance path to where you're going. And so what I just demonstrated is just, you know, going direct to somewhere. So if I just kind of grab, I can even say, go direct to Chicago. It doesn't even have to be an airport. And I say direct to, and it says, oh, the map pointer, and boom, now we're going to Chicago. So again, it's just touch something, direct to, it pulls up information. In this case, it's just the map pointer. If I press direct to again, now we're navigating to that spot. If I wanted to navigate to, you know, some nearest airport, let's say Arlington, Washington is just off our left. I can say, instead of like direct to or touching it, I can touch it and then say direct to like I just did. But I can also instead just say nearest. What are my nearest airports? Let's go to Arlington, which is that first one. And then I just say direct to again. Now you can see if I zoom in, the magenta line. And notice actually, it doesn't start at the airplane. That's because it knows that like you need to turn to get on course. So this is super helpful when you're navigating, when you have the autopilot on and you go grab a new waypoint. What a lot of systems will do is it'll just take that line from wherever you started and cut it. And so then the autopilot's can do this like this weird dog leg and fly kind of back to where it is. We kind of know where that beginning of your next leg is going to be based on a turn. So if, let me just do this with maybe a less severe. So let's just take that guy and say direct to. So you can see if we were flying autopilot, or if we just start turning immediately, as we turn to go on course, I didn't do it quick enough, you basically don't have any extra area. So that's more useful actually when we're stringing together more than one thing to make a flight plan. So let's do that. So I'm going to, so I have just a direct to this fix, but let's choose an airport or someplace. Let's take just these lakes. And I can say, let's get some info about it. And it's, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's do it with another fix. So if I touch the fix and I say info, I have information about the fix. And now I'll say add to flight plan instead of going direct to it. So I'll add to the flight plan. We now get, it's where we want to add it. Do we want to go there right away or after the next thing? You can insert it wherever you want in the list. I'll say insert there. And then if we go out of there, you can see what it's doing is you've got the flight plan, and then you've got the next leg there. Now, as I mentioned, it doesn't actually overfly. You can set it to overfly if you want, but it's not overflying that intermediate fix. So the very next thing on my flight plan is technically this fix, but it's not, by default, it's not going to fly to it. It's going to kind of round the corner. So again, if you're flying by autopilot, you don't end up doing this leg where you go to the fix and then do this like teardrop over it. That is appropriate to do in some cases, especially if you're flying IFR, because fix to fix or whatever. But if you're just kind of stringing along, general waypoints, this will round the corner and the autopilot will fly gracefully, and you won't, burn up an extra 2 or 3 minutes of flight that you don't really need to. So let's talk a little bit about, so that's sort of like a basics on navigation. Let's talk about information about things. So we'll go back to Northup, and I mentioned already that there are different ways we can find things. We can touch things and say info. Now we have information about that airport. I could also go nearest, and there's lots of things that we are near. We're near airports. There's weather stations, VORs, fixes, NDBs, visual reporting points, user waypoints. If I just kind of use the knob where I can touch and get information about an airport, identifier, where it is, what it's called, what fuel it's got, kind of all the stuff that would be in both on a chart and also in the airport facilities directory. How far away you are, estimated time to a traffic pattern, lat long, tower frequency or CTAF. We could also get a more verbose or a more complete list of all the frequencies. And if there's some kind of like narrative about like, what is this tower frequency? You just push this little diamond button and it says, it's for this runway. If there are plates or charts associated with it, in this case, let's say an airport diagram. Actually, let me just reset to show you something cool. All of these are georeferenced, which means if I just go, let's go back to where I was. And so whether we're looking at an airport diagram and taxiing or taking off, or whether you're looking at an actual procedure plate, you can zoom in and literally overfly the procedure. This little magenta pip that's kind of coming in, that's telling us where we'll be over the ground when when we get to our bugged altitudes. So whether you're flying the autopilot or just have a little reminder bug, it's nice for planning. So if I'm at, let's say right now we're at 3,700 feet, and then I change the altitude bug to, let's say 1,000 feet. Let's see if it's gonna do that. There we go. So it's saying based on my current rate of descent, I will hit the altitude at that blue line. So it's really nice if you're trying to, let's say, not get to a certain altitude or start climbing until you reach an airspace limit. Or if you need to, let's say, get to an altitude before you cross a threshold. We're leaving an airspace here, but you get the idea. So going back to, so nearest, so we have nearest airport, and then all that information. That airport, if it has weather, or even if it doesn't have weather, we give the nearest station. So weather is via ADS-B in. So this is Painfield, VFR. You can look at the decoded version. Where is it? It's actually a setting, but you can look at the decoded version if you want to, drive yourself crazy. But this is just in the kind of the standard ASOS format. Runway information for the airports, and then the remarks, which are basically all that textual information in the airport facilities directories, those green books that nobody buys anymore. So that's all there for you too. Let's see. So we talked about nearest. So all that's under that button. Nearest is kind of, if you're VFR flying, you're using nearest a ton. Flight plan brings you up to the flight plan. There you can do things like just add another leg by touching, and then key. You don't have to use nearest. You can also just key in. So I want to go to Boeing field K, B, and it's predicting based on what's closest. So I just said KB. There's lots of KB other things, but KBFI Boeing field is the nearest to where we are. So I insert that into the flight plan, and now we go to Boeing field next. And then if I go back out of the map, there should be another new leg on the flight plan down to the Seattle area. Let me reset this because we're kind of skimming along the ground. All right. If you had a third-party navigator, like the Avidyne IFD series, you would have in the flight plan menu another tab here, which would say IFD or whatever you've named it. And when you select it, you can see its flight plan. You can't edit that flight plan there, but it'll show up here. And also you can set it to show up on the map. So all of those holds and procedures and just the flight plan that's coming from like the certified thing that you should be following if you're on a GPS IFR flight plan, that'll show up on our map as well. Let's see, have I missed anything on the mapping? Let me just kind of go into, talked about flight plans, talked about information, talked about the nearest list. Oh, yeah, also nearest VORs. There's no nav radio in SkyView, but we know where VORs are, and that's basically, good enough for, stringing them together in a flight plan. Not a legal replacement for a nav radio, of course, but, let's say you actually did end up, needing to navigate and ATC is telling you, can you go to this VOR or something like that. I don't know if that's even a realistic use case, but just, we know where the VORs are and you can navigate to them just like any other place in the world. Visual reporting points, which is more of a European thing. User waypoints, so Dynon comes pre-programmed, so if you want to overfly us, that's there for you. Air traffic control frequencies, so these are, and if you have the Comm Radio, you can shoot them into the Comm Radio from here, and also same thing with flight service stations. So if, there's the nearest one, and TuneComm. We'll talk about the Comm Radio in a bit. I think that kind of covers the basics of. We also have this info column, which there's lots of little configurable widgets or info items, including GPS altitude, what your next waypoint is, distance to waypoint, estimated time en route to the next one, estimated time of arrival at the next lat long, what your next waypoint is, and there's a handful of others. You can also, when you kind of do that declutter, that'll go away. You can also turn it off if you want. So again, anything that's display oriented, what's displayed and what's not displayed, it's under the display button. Turn off the map info column, and now you've got a little bit more map real estate when you're not really concerned about, let's say, performance or what time you're getting somewhere. All right, I'll take a couple of questions on the mapping and navigation and flight planning, and then we'll move on to the next thing.
All right, Mike, it looks like Galaxy Plays has a question. I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, Mike, question. I've got a 10-inch and a 7-inch Classic. What would it involve in replacing that to the HDX? Same wiring harness, new wiring harness, replace both
great
time?
Yeah, great question. So from a wiring perspective, they're identical. So same 37-pin harness, same SkyView network connectors, same Ethernet port if you've got them wired together for database syncing. Okay. There is the cutout. So your SkyView Classic cutout has more room than you need for SkyView HDX. So SkyView HDX has that canted, the beveled edge. And so we don't ship it with them anymore, but there is a little plate that's available that kind of covers. So if you didn't want to cut a new panel, that you can fill that hole. I don't know if we charge for it. It used to be a pack, and it's not anymore. And our sales and support team can answer that. The screw holes are in different places, so you will need to drill a couple of holes. Okay. I think the top. So you have 6 holes on Classic if it's a 10-inch. And there's only 4, and I think they're both in different places. And I might be wrong about that. It might be only 2 of them. I forget. And then your follow-up question is probably going to be, do you have a trade-in program? And the answer is we don't, although it's super likely. And we have been saying that for a while. We frankly don't always have the capacity to. We know that a lot of people want to upgrade, and that some people have done it on their own. They sell the old, they go to the new. We're happy to welcome somebody to the Dynon family, whether they buy a used display from somebody else or not. But we know there's a lot of demand out there. So we are likely to put together a program. Don't have the timing on that, but it's but it'll probably happen at some point.
Okay. Can I run an HDX with the 7-inch Classic, or do they have to be the same?
They have to be the same.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a there's sort of the official answer, and then there's the behind the scenes story. The official answer is they don't work together because the software is going to change between them at some point. Yep. That technically hasn't happened yet. So like if you happen to like have them, they would work. But we've stopped testing them. Let me put it that way. We don't test them together. So I could even be wrong. Like basically, like, I've seen them hooked up together. They work. Okay. But I could even be wrong about that. So I almost shouldn't be saying that. But the official answer is no. Don't mix them. They will be incompatible at some point.
All right.
And I'll jump in on this bolt hole spacing question. The top 2 screws, top left and top right, are the same for HDX and Classic. Lower screws, 2 new positions will need to be drilled and tapped, or a rib nut installed for the HDX. But that's the spacing.
Cool. So we got one more question from Frank, and then I'll move on to the next set of things.
All right, Frank, you're unmuted. You can ask your question.
Hello, Mike. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Very informative.
Of course.
Considering a Garmin GNC 355, can you speak to the navigation integration capabilities with the 355 from Garmin?
Yeah, and I just need to remind myself, you said the GNC 355. Some of their newer things are.
Mike, that's the GPS 175 with the Comm Radio.
Yep.
Exactly right. Yes.
Yep. It works. It integrates just like the GTNs or the IFDs. It basically, you program your flight plan over there. It shows up on SkyView. It shows up on the HSI. You can shoot your GPS and LPV approaches. It basically all works. And then, as we talked about earlier, there's some data that goes back and forth to enable other functionality. Kind of like minor things.
Okay, but no limitations that you know of.
No limitations that I know of. Let's see. I do forget off the top of my head whether we can shoot comm frequencies, because that is a GPS comm, isn't it?
I don't believe we can shoot comm frequencies to the 355 right now.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, we can send frequencies to the other. So the standalone Garmin Comm Radios, the
255.
The 255. Thanks, and the legacy SL30s and SL40s.
Ah, very good. Aircraft, my aircraft also has an SL30, so that's good to know.
Yep, totally.
All right, thank you.
Yep, cool. All right, so I will move on to, let's see, what are we up to? We're up to Comm Radio. So yeah, so just so you know, like what's coming up is Comm Radio, Transponder, ADSB in and out, Autopilot, and yeah, I guess I should really budget 2 hours for these things, especially if we're asking questions, and then some talk about other system things. So now we're going to talk. We'll talk Comm Radio. I think what I'll do is I'm going to just kind of go through the next few sections and then pop back up for questions in a little while. So, comm radio. Let's see, let's get me spotlighted. Cool. Everybody see, there we go. All right, so comm radio. So let's adjust my thing here. All right. So Dynon comm radio is fundamentally, I mean, this is just a control panel that has a volume knob and then the interface and another dual concentric knob. And so the comm radio, so Dynon's comm radio works completely differently than any other comm radio. So almost any EFIS or GPS navcom, you can do this, where you go to nearest airport, comm frequency, and let's tune it. Oh, that's pretty easy, right? And it is pretty easy. Now we've got that frequency. I just sent ground over to here. It also shows up in this top bar here. But with SkyView's comm, it's even easier. So I fly from Painfield, which is Seattle, to Oshkosh, and I never spin in a frequency using the knobs, which we have as well, except for when I'm kind of in the last, I don't know, half hour that we rip on, or if I'm talking air to air. Because what we do is we press airport, because it's connected to SkyView. It says nearest airport, and if I just turn the knob, it says, we can say, okay, Arlington, that's the nearest one. The first one's the closest. And now I've kind of locked the airport, so to speak, into the comm radio. Now I've got these dedicated buttons that are all the things that you might want in order. So if I'm approaching, I'm going to go grab ATIS, or if there's only AWAS, that frequency is in there. So that's now in standby. And I just click the knob here. Let's adjust a little bit, and now we flip flop back to active. As I get closer, I probably want to talk to tower, or if CTAF. So this doesn't have a tower, so it's just a single multicom frequency. So that's in standby. I hit the flip flop, and now it's active. If I were on, let me choose a better airport where I have all the frequencies. So I'm going to send that to airport to the comm. So yes, now we're at Painfield. Now I've landed. So we go ground. It's ground point 8 or ground point 9er, flip flop. And similarly, if I want to talk to approach or departure, I can just hit the ATC button and get the approach and departure frequencies. Since I changed the airport, where this is Painfield, a big class Delta airport, where they build Boeings and near Seattle. There are multiple tower frequencies, so I can toggle between them, and if there's a Unicom. And so basically, as you're flying, you just say, okay, what's my nearest airport? What's my nearest airport? I'll choose a small one and lock it in, get my tower AWAS, and then just start listening. And that's all you ever do. So again, airport, what's the nearest one? Arlington, let's listen to tower. That's it. So you're kind of, and so as you're going, you just need to grab the nearest airport and just tune it that way. Now so you can use the comm radio interface here, or I mentioned the touchscreen. I just touch this area here, and now I've got a similar interface. It doesn't have knobs for tuning if I wanted to tune a frequency to standby. I've got my swap button, which is the same thing as pushing the knob up here. I do have those same buttons that correspond up here. So right now we've got KAWO, same thing that's listed there. So Arlington Airport, and if I want to do ATIS or ground, there's no ground, so just yell at me, or multicom or CTAF, or departure or departure frequency. So again, that's a standby, that's the active. Same thing, that's a standby, that's the active, and same thing here, standby, that's the active. So you have the same information depending on your preference. So that's kind of the two primary ways to use the comm radio. We also can do, as we were talking about a minute ago, I can go nearest, airport, comm radio, and I can actually just choose any of these frequencies. Let's say like the approach frequency, say tune comm, press the button there, tune comm, that just got shot into the standby frequency. Same thing, if I want to do the AWAS weather, tune comm, and it just changed up there for that matter. So I can also go, one other thing we can do to tune the airport is I can choose an airport, would be Island Naval Air Station. I can say airport to comm. This button down here, if I press that loads the airport into the comm radio so that I can then use those frequency specific buttons. So a few different ways to use the comm radio there. Yeah, let's see, did I capture everything? I think I captured most of the comm features. There's also a dual watch. So it's easy to show here. If I enable dual watch, what this does is it allows us to not just listen to the active frequency, but to monitor for activity on the standby. And if there is activity, you'll hear it. But at the same time, so let's say you wanted to listen to ATIS while still listening to Tower because it's a busy day and you're just kind of you're trying to track both at the same time. You'll when you open up dual watch, you'll listen to ATIS until something transmits on their primary frequency, and then it's automatically kind of locks into that one. You can't listen to two things simultaneously, but you can sort of listen for both. Another way to use dual watch is if you wanted to monitor, let's say 1215, on the standby while still having whatever your primary frequency is in there. And then if you press the volume knob on the physical thing, that'll open up the squelch, meaning you'll just hear whatever's coming over the radio, static or a weak distant weather report if that's what you're looking for. So you could do that as well. So kind of standard comm radio frequency stuff on that front, or comm radio feature stuff on that front. But this interface is awesome. I don't remember. Yeah, as I said, I don't remember the last time I've looked up a frequency and did this. Let's comm radio. I'm going to move on to, let's see, we've got transponder. Let's recenter here. Sorry if that's making anybody sick. All right, so transponder. You frankly don't need to think about it too much, especially when you're a VFR. So there is, under here, transponder, or again, I go menu transponder. So that's again, that dual use. Touch screen's great, but in turbulence, and you're like, menu transponder. Same thing. I can touch these buttons. I can, give myself a discrete code, whatever they assign to me, or I can squawk VFR with a single button. 1200 for the US. You can assign it to, I forget what the number is in Europe, but it's very much not 1200. You could also use similar that using touch screen or not, we can use the knob and say 3, 6, 6, 7. So you can see there's a little white outline. And then this is set up, for some reason I need to fix this. There's standby, ground, on and out, standard mode S things, except there's also an auto, which is not showing for probably because of the way this demo screen is set up. But most of the time, so SkyView knows things like your speed and GPS speed if you're moving, if you're flying. And so if you just put it on auto, there's an auto button, it'll say, it'll basically go from ground to out as appropriate. I literally, unless I'm talking to a controller, flight following, I don't think about the transponder other than to, make sure that it is working. And if you need to ident, the most common thing is, of course, boom, ident. That'll light up in a real transponder when it knows it's identing. It doesn't in this demo configuration. That's your Mode S transponder. The Mode S transponder in the US is also your ADS-B out device. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 thing. So you marry the transponder with our approved or our compliant GPS position source. It's called the SVGPS 2020. And that's a fully compliant 2020 compliant ADS-B out. And then and going back to the map, there's also traffic and weather. That's another box, which is part of the SkyView's kind of fleet of modules behind the scenes that brings in the traffic and weather, ADS-B in. And what's also nice about the Mode S transponder is it's going away, but it's still pretty useful in terminal areas while it still exists. It has so ADS-B traffic is also known as TIS-B traffic, but the predecessor to that was TIS-A traffic, and that is used on what is now becoming legacy radars. They're slowly being upgraded. But if you are in the Seattle area, even though you have ADS-B, oftentimes you're actually getting the TIS-A weather via the transponder, or it's not weather, traffic via the transponder, and that is considered higher integrity because it's sort of what the controllers are seeing. So it's basically a piped up, tailored to your airplane traffic picture just for you. So TIS-A is still around for a while. It's going away whenever they upgrade a terminal area's radar to the newest generation, you lose it. But then the idea is that you will have ADS-B for the longer term. It is nice that you have it because it still does exist and it still does provide nice performance. So that's the transponder. we just talked about ADS-B in and out. ADS-B in, so ADS-B out is in the transponder. ADS-B in is dual band. So, so just a quick aside about ADS-B. So what people don't realize, or many people don't realize, is even if you have a dual band receiver, let's say a portable thing in your airplane, we make one Dynon that can talk to iPads and ForeFlight and FlyQ. You only see the traffic that you can see directly. So even if you're dual band and you can see all of the 1090 guys and all of the 978 guys, which are the two ADS-B frequencies that people could be transmitting on, you're only seeing the people that have ADS-B equipped. And I don't know what the percentage is right now, but it's something like, I think it's still sub 20%, maybe it's 50%. I don't know. Let's just say it's 50% of the fleet is equipped with ADS-B. That means if you're not an emitter, if you don't have ADS-B out, you're missing like half of the traffic. And the reason that is that when you are an ADS-B out emitter, you are saying to the world and the ADS-B stations like, hey, I'm here. And then what the ADS-B system does is it literally makes a hockey puck of traffic around you. I think it's like plus or minus, I think 3,000 or 5,000 feet in altitude, and it's 15 miles. I have those numbers slightly wrong, but it's a hockey puck of about the right distance of traffic that's tailored to you that includes anything that the air traffic control system knows about. So any mode C reply, a guy that decided not to equip because you're, kind of out, not in a major metro area, or just the people that haven't equipped yet. There's a lot of those people. So when you're an ADS-B out, emitter, when you do have your SkyView transponder-based ADS-B out signal, that wakes up the ground station to feed you the data of all of the different ADS-B in targets. So basically, if you actually want a complete traffic picture, one that's like the most trustworthy, you want to have the ADS-B out, which you have when you have SkyView. So that's ADS-B in and out. I'm going to change my order a little bit. I'm going to talk about the knob control panel before I get into Autopilot. So we talked earlier about how these knobs, let's go full screen. So how these knobs are configurable. So I can click this and I can change my knob function to adjust the altimeter setting, or the course, or the heading bug, or the altitude bug, or the vertical speed bug, or the airspeed bug. And I can do that. And I can also touch, touch the screen. I touch the heading and it reassigned that knob. And now I'm adjusting heading. I touch the altitude and I'm adjusting the altitude bug now. Touch full speed, blah, blah, blah. You get it. But it's also true that, and if you have two screens and you have one set up as primary flight display, you actually have two of those. You can actually have like one always set to heading and one always set to altitude. And then you've got like most of your, driving around the sky features covered. But we have this other product that I don't know what the percentage is. Maybe Kyle, if you know, feel free to pipe up. And the lighting is, let's see,
what was the question again, Mike? I apologize.
So, just roughly what percentage of people are using the knob control panel these days?
Gosh, anybody who has room in the panel for it. It's so affordable. It brings so much function in. If you've got room for it, they get it. Yeah.
And so what this is it's three knobs for the things you adjust the most. So if you're, the altimeter setting, and it's, I guess, let me see, so the altimeter setting, you see it's, that's altitude bug. The barrow, which is the altimeter setting, you can sort of see the altitude off the corner of the screen is kind of moving as I adjust the altimeter setting. And then heading and track, and, which is what direction you're flying. And, it's worthwhile just talking for a moment, what's the difference between heading and track? Heading is your magnetic heading. It's what direction the airplane's pointed. If the airplane's nose is pointing north, you're heading north. Your heading is north, or your magnetic heading is north, more particularly. If you have a huge wind, let's say from the left, you might be pointed north, at 360. But if you have you're pointed north and you have a wind from the west, but you might be tracking or flying over the ground at, let's say, 010. So if you're taking a vector from ATC under Autopilot, they want you flying heading because they want everybody flying heading because they're building in the wind stuff themselves. If you're just flying around, the map though, and just kind of, you want to go, if I want to go, like avoid this mountain range, as we can see here, I want to track kind of there. I don't care which way I point or where the wind's going to take me. I just want to get where I want to go. So using track, and this has a lot to do with the way you fly the Autopilot, is a much more kind of like, this is where I want to go. Or for example, I want to intercept that airport up there. So I put the track line there, and in our demo, there's really no headwind or crosswind, but so they match. But you can have a different, a much different heading and track when your winds are, when they've picked up, and when you're at altitude. So yeah, so if you're VFR and just kind of going and just want to kind of point with the map, you're going to use track mode. If you're IFR, you're taking headings from ATC, it's going to be heading. And this bug or this knob adjusts whichever one is currently selected. And if you're on autopilot, you can only have one of track or heading selected at once. So we call the bug here on the display. This cyan bug here is either heading or track, depending on what mode we're in on autopilot. So next up is autopilot. But I think before that, I'll take another couple of questions about ideally about the comm radio, transponder, ADSB in and out, and let's see. Looks like we got a question from Scott.
Hi there.
Scott, are you there?
I am here. Can you send the frequencies to an IFD 540?
Not yet, but that's also on the list of features. Yeah, so there's more integration to do with some of the IFR navigators on that front. So not yet.
Okay.
What a lot of people end up doing in an IFR setup is you'll end up having two comms, and just because of the interface, most people will use our comm as the primary comm. So that's the one that's on the top bar, and the one that you're shooting frequencies to. So that's sort of the paradigm there, and then use the IFD interface for its radio tuning.
Okay.
And Bill.
Bill. Bill, we're trying to unmute you.
Mute.
There you go.
There I am. I have an SL30 and a GNS 480, and I want to send comm or send nav. Can I do that discreetly, or does it send the nav or comm frequency to both radios at once?
Yeah, so there's kind of the notion of a primary comm, and in that case, and I forget the 480. I know that there are a bunch out there, but not as many hooked up to Dynon systems. The SL30 you could definitely send both comm and nav frequencies to. And
yeah, the 480 thinks it's an SL30 for nav and
yeah,
comm.
but you do need to choose one or the other. So there's kind of the notion of when you're sending something, it sends it like to. Now, all that said, if you actually kind of connected them in a clever way, you could probably send it to both simultaneously. But then you end up with both frequencies getting changed.
Okay.
In terms of just the serial ports getting connected to both devices at once. But the one transmit from the Dynon going to both receives.
Yeah, the 480 talks on AirInc, and the other one talks on serial.
Yeah.
The old Apollo serial.
Yep. Yeah, and so if I had that set up, what I'd probably do is the serial port hooked up to the SL30 for the frequency transfer, and then the AirInc for the 480 stuff, nav and GPS data.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, autopilot. Oops, just did the wrong thing. All right, I think that's spotlighted now. Okay, so autopilot. All right. So we have a 3-axis autopilot. So roll, pitch, and yaw. Most popular in the RV10 and in the Bonanza. There's a 3-axis certified sub. And our autopilot is kind of 2 autopilots in one, which is there is what we call a simplified mode and an expert mode. And so I'm going to switch us over to, this isn't something that you would do in flight. This is something you do on the ground, of course, kind of doing your setup. But I'm going to go to simplified mode. And what's really neat about simplified mode is it boils down your autopilot controls to what altitude and where do you want to go. And so before we even get to that, this is the Autopilot Status Bar. It says AP in the middle. If I touch it there, anywhere on the bar, I get the menu. Again, the other way to do that is menu, autopilot, same thing. And there's only really two modes. There's if you have the yaw damper, and this is a 180, turn myself around, I got in trouble. The level button is fairly obvious. Let's just start with the level button. I say level, boom, straight and level. The autopilot bar is now showing us our roll axis and our pitch axis modes. It turned green. That means that it's engaged, and those little green arrows are showing which axes are engaged. And the saying we're straight, straight and roll and level. And so that's that. More commonly, if I say track and out, this is saying now on my roll axis, we are trying to get to track 275, and we're trying to get to altitude 4,800. In simplified mode, when I engage the autopilot, it snaps the bugs, or let's just talk about that for a second. The bugs are these little cyan things that are the things that I want the autopilot to target. So if I grab the track and spin it, you can see that just changed. The number changed up there too, changed down at the little track window, and that's my new target for the autopilot. Same thing if I touch the altitude, that selected the altitude. If I adjust altitude to 5,000 feet, the autopilot is going vertical speed now to altitude. And so in the simplified mode, it will, whenever you, I'll disengage again. Whenever I engage, it's going to take those bugs and just snap them to whatever I'm currently at. So meaning just maintain my current course and my current altitude, or my current track and my current altitude. From there, it just goes and it'll chase the bugs whenever you adjust them. So if I change my track and I change my alt, it's going to initiate a climb or a descent at whatever your vertical speed that you've set in setup. You can also adjust that after the fact if I don't want to climb or descend as fast as I normally do for airspace reasons, or whatever reason, or performance reasons, or shock cooling or whatever. So so in simplified mode, it just follows the bugs. It's just kind of slave to them. It goes chasing them immediately. The other mode is, so that's, and so this track and alt is go in a direction, go to an altitude. The other mode is HSI plus alt. And what HSI plus alt is lock in on the altitude in the same way, but instead of following a direction that I spin in on the track bug, it's saying follow whatever the GPS wants. In this case, the GPS wants to go to Boeing Field, which is behind us, and we're off axis. In this demo mode, it doesn't quite steer the way it would in a real airplane, but what would happen in real life is if you said GPS immediately, the airplane's going to start to center that needle. In this case, it means we got to get the airport roughly in front of us, and we're our cross track error is that. So we'd probably set like a 30 or 40 degree intercept angle, so we could see it on the map quick. Yeah, so let's see, where's the flight plan? Yeah, we're way far away from it. So the flight plan doesn't even start until we're up ahead. But it centers the needle, it flies the red line. If I go, let's say, direct to Boeing Field, now it's centered. And what the autopilot would do in this case, it would just fly right down the pink line, both on HSI and the corresponding pink line, magenta line on the map. So that's simplified mode. If you're flying around VFR, you don't need more than this. And if you did get in trouble, you can 180. That just flips the bug to right behind you. Airplane turns. You flew into clouds. You're not instrument rated or not current. Get yourself out of trouble. It'll just turn you around. So that's simplified mode. Pretty simple. Kind of 2 buttons, on off. Adjust your targets. Where do you want to go? How high do you want to be? Kind of the end. The other mode. So now we'll go to. We'll reset to what we call expert mode. And now the autopilot menu looks a lot different. This is much more similar to an airliner style autopilot or other autopilots that you've seen in the market, where you have discrete control over your lateral modes, so heading, track, or nav. Similarly, altitude, hold, tracking a glide slope, airspeed, vertical speed. The yaw damper has its own button. And then there's a flight director and then autopilot. I'm going to demo things on this screen, but let me just show you one other thing, which is, and if you're going in with an IFR setup and you are and you want kind of the best usable interface, these buttons do exactly the same thing as on-screen buttons, but they're dedicated. They're always there. They have a nice tactile feel, and it's a nice little workload reducer. So it's got the same autopilot flight director buttons. These are your lateral modes, your nav, track, things that the ailerons control, and heading. Source changes what the HSI is listening to. It's the same as touching that that block down here. It changes, it toggles through the navigation sources. And then similarly, this is the pitch stuff: altitude hold, vertical speed, airspeed hold, and if we have a glide path or glide slope, VNAV. The nose up and nose down buttons are to adjust vertical speed or airspeed when you're in that mode. And of course, the level button is sort of the just get me out of trouble button. This module is also an integrated trim controller. So instead of purchasing, let's say most people on the home built side use the Ray Allen trim servos. Instead of installing a relay deck or some other third-party device or not, this is that thing. What's nice about that, and so you basically wire up your motors to this and your stick switches to it. And because it knows about the autopilot, and the autopilot servos can measure force, they know when you're out of trim. And if you don't have this module, the autopilot will tell you like, oh, hey, like you changed the configuration of the airplane, we're out of trim up, please. You get a little trim up, trim down. You bump the trim or you spin the wheel, and then you neutralize that. The servos really react the way that you do as a human because they're doing the same thing you're doing. They're grabbing the stick, underneath where you can't see it, but it can sense whether it's needing to apply force to the stick in a continuous way, same way you do when you like change configuration. You say, oh, I need to trim so that I don't, because I'm applying force to the stick. When you have, so even without this module, the servos and the autopilot will give you trim advice. When you have this, and because it's your trim controller, because we know the trim, this will bump the trim automatically. It basically is an auto trim when you're flying under autopilot. And so that's super useful. Let's say you change your altitude target, you were in a climb, you level off. The autopilots went into altitude hold mode. It is now, if you haven't changed power, what's going to end up happening is it's going to apply some forward stick pressure. And if you don't trim, you're just going to have to hold that there, right? So instead, what you would normally do is you bump the trim a few times to even it out. If you have this module, the servos, and presumably you're not holding the stick or you're not feeling the force because the autopilot's flying. And the autopilot says, ooh, I need a little bit of trim up. And it does it very slowly. So it's not going to like, run away. It does, I think it's like a pulse per second. It'll basically respond to its own trim advice to reconfigure the airplane's trim. And, and it is intentionally slow, again, to avoid things like, trim runaways. What I'll often do in my airplane when I make like big configuration changes, like I'll know that like I'm going to need to trim down. I'll just like give a little buzz on the trim motor on the stick, and then let the airplane do like the, clean up the rest of it over, a few more seconds. So that's the autopilot control panel. Oh, one other thing, this does, affect all the autopilot modes. So if I just, press autopilot, I just turned it off. Let me just clear everything out here. So if I just go autopilot, I turned it on. And if I change the modes, it reflects there just as if we were in the menu. But where's I going with that? Lost my train of thought. All of the trim controller is, even though it talks to SkyView, it is completely independent. So even if, let's say, your SkyView system had an electrical failure, as long as you still have electrical power, the trim controller in this will still work. It's a completely independent subsystem. So I'm going to talk pretty briefly about the Expert Autopilot because it is pretty involved. But the way it works is, clear everything out. So now we're kind of back to square one, nothing. If I just hit autopilot, it doesn't fly in a direction or at a particular altitude like the simplified mode does, because maybe you've actually set up your bugs in an anticipated maneuver. What it does on expert mode is it holds your roll and it holds your vertical speed. So it kind of keeps doing what you were doing. So if you were kind of in a climbing, a climbing turn, it's going to hold that roll angle, hold that vertical speed. and until you program it otherwise. And so there's less forced automation with the expert mode. With simplified mode, it just goes and chases those numbers. With simplified mode, it just chases numbers. With expert mode, you have to kind of tell it what you want. So, you know, I engaged it and its vertical speed happens to be 0, but now say I want to hold altitude. It's now going to hold 4,700 feet. Let's say I want to change altitude. Well, I'm going to grab the altitude bug by touching that and then spinning the knob. And let's say we want to go down to 3,500 feet. Notice nothing's changed. Autopilot hasn't done anything yet. Still holding altitude, saying I'm holding altitude at 4,700 feet. The bug is somewhere else. So again, this is sort of like, I know what's coming next because there's an airspace I want to get to, but not yet, but I kind of want to set up the airplane for it in anticipation. So there's my next altitude. And then so when I want to go to it, I can either engage airspeed or vertical speed mode, but what I usually do is I say, hey, it's time to go down. And so we go nose down. You can use the button on the control panel as well. And it will choose, you set it and set up what your default climb and descent vertical speeds are. You can set them to be different. And it will assume that, and then you can just use that nose up and nose down to fine tune that. So if I go up, 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 you know, now I'm only minus 100 feet on the vertical speed, or down, 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 down. If we want, oops, I'm pushing buttons I don't mean to be pushing. Down, 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 down. And now we're going at 1,100 feet per minute down. So similarly, maybe particularly on climb out, so let's just go back to alt hold. So now it's just going to lock in on the altitude that we've asked it to. And so now I'm going to go again, adjust the altitude bug to climb. And I'm going to say airspeed mode. It's going to climb at the airspeed that I've set. So right now we're set to 119 knots, but maybe my VY is 100 knots. So we can grab the airspeed bug and turn airspeed down. And Autopilot can't apply power. But what it will do is it'll pitch up, right? So it'll pitch up to reduce airspeed. And so that's real nice on climb out if you know, you're kind of in a cruise climb and you have a nice number of your vertical speed performance is going to change as altitude and as your engine configuration changes. But you may have an airspeed in I do in my airplane that it likes to be above for cooling. So like I'm usually climbing a cruise climb at like 110 knots or 100 knots, so something more than the 80 or 90 that I do on initial climb out. And so it's real nice to have an airspeed, and especially if you're just trying to get to altitude as quickly as possible, you set that at VY, and then you adjust your engine as you go, and that gives you, and then you get the vertical speed that you get out of the power configuration, or the power out of your engine. So you're not sort of saying like, oh, well, I need to lower the vertical speed because I don't get as much climb performance. You set the airspeed, you get the climb performance you get, and if it's VY, that's going to be, your basically your max rate of climb, right? Same principle. So okay, just on the pitch side, if I did have a glide slope like this, I can go to VNav, and it's like out hold VNav, and then let's see. Why am I not getting it? I think there's a demo mode we're gonna see. So I have a glide path, and I should be able to arm VNav, which would say hold altitude until I intercept my glide slope. Actually, maybe it'll work with this. No, it won't. Yeah, so that's a demo panel weirdness here. But basically, hold altitude until I get to VNav. This one's active. This one would be armed. This would be in white, and there'd be that little arrow in the Autopilot status bar saying, "Hey, here's what's up next: a glide slope." All the same things apply on the lateral side, or the aileron side, which is I can say, I want a heading, and I want to change that heading. But again, unlike the simplified mode, where if I turn off the heading and turn on the heading, it'll snap the heading and adjust. In expert mode, it's waiting for you to command where you want to go. Similarly, if I'm trying to intercept a flight plan and I say, okay, I'm in heading mode and I'm flying 028 right now, and I want to fly along my GPS navigation path. I say, okay, nav mode. Actually, in this case, it did switch over. If I'm not really close to the course over the ground, when I hit nav, it won't switch over, automatically. It'll arm it, but then you need to point the airplane there because heading mode will still be active until it can capture that heading. Some of these concepts are a little hard to explain while we're kind of pretend flying around the sky, and this is where we are ripe for some additional videos that are really well tuned to it. But the key thing to know is this is sort of like the IFR centric, or somebody that's just really likes having really discrete control over your autopilot configuration, whereas simplified autopilot is kind of point and shoot. So two different philosophies. You can switch them, as you saw, it takes all of 10 seconds to switch them when you're on the ground. And one other thing, we can also turn off in expert mode the autopilot. So I turn off the autopilot but leave flight director engaged. What this is doing, so you still have all this guidance, but you can see this just went yellow and it's flashing because there was a mode change. And so it's kind of alerting us that like, hey, something just changed. Now the autopilot's off, but the flight director is still on. And that means we're still getting guidance to our GPS right now and to our altitude. And how are we getting that guidance? Well, the yellow wedge here is, represents the airplane's axis, the airplane. If we say ask for a new heading, I guess it's not going to do it. It'll always be locked in on this demo mode. But basically, that pink wedge will kind of fly away from the yellow wedge. And if you seat the yellow wedge in the pink or magenta wedge by manipulating the flight controls, you are basically doing what the autopilot would want you to do. So you can think about the flight director as autopilot without the servo engaged. The system's still giving you a device in terms of like, you need to climb, you should put your nose here, or you've asked for a turn, you should be banked at some degrees. So it's basically you hand flying with autopilot guidance. I think I've covered most of the autopilot features, at least the basics. So I think at this point we'll come back for a few questions on the last topic, and then I'll get into some of the bits and pieces. So coming up next, we're kind of wrapping up, which is I'm going to talk about the bits and pieces that make up SkyView system. I'll take you around the back of the panel, a little bit of install stuff, and I'll tell you about Advanced Panel as well, which is a product from our sister company. Do we have any questions? I don't see any hands up. I'll just a couple more seconds for hands. Oh, there's a hand. We got Joshua. And
all right, Josh, you can go ahead.
Okay, two quick questions. Earlier, when you were talking about the approvals, you said something after the M20, but I didn't catch what it was. And the other question is, for the models where the autopilot isn't approved, is the flight director still enabled?
So you do have to have the servos installed for the flight director to work. So that's not an impossible thing to do in software to decouple them, but right now they are coupled for not any super great reason, just historical reasons. And as we like to joke around the office, it's just software, and of course, just software means it's just some work quantity, and a feature that could come to pass someday. But right now, the flight director is tied to the servos being in the airplane and the airplane and the autopilot being configured into expert mode.
And then the other part of that was you said.
Right. Yeah. So I just want to make sure I get don't forget any of them. So if you go to dynoncertified.com, there's a list of airplane models, both what's approved now and upcoming, and we kind of give these progress bars and kind of like real vague dates. So next up is the Piper Seneca. That is pretty close. The Beach Bonanza, the 36 and A36 are what we expect to get. There'll be some fine tuning of which Bonanzas, because there are some material differences between them. And so we're still fine tuning that. And that's actually not too far behind the Seneca. We have those both targeted at first half of this year. And we think we're going to make that. Behind that, it's the Cessna 182. Behind that, it's the Mooney M20. Behind that, we have no firm commitments. That probably takes us through the rest of the year, the 182 and the Mooney. If we end up on a quicker pace, we'll probably, or when we select, and what we do now is, which we didn't do earlier, is we don't really publish what we think we're going to do next until we have an airplane in-house that we're starting to tear apart, because that represents the actual commitment to doing work. Because we have honestly changed our order and our minds based on a variety of factors in the past. So, so that's the current order of airplanes.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mike, it looks like we have another question from Chick.
Yeah. All right, Chick.
Hey, Mike, just about 3 years ago when you guys started the certified, you were talking about the 172 and also the Baron. Now, I know the Baron is a third-party STC, but can you give us any hope?
There is hope. There's a little bit of inside baseball that it's complicated to explain, and some that we're choosing not to talk about. But what we have learned over time is that the way for us to get things certified is to do it ourselves. And the owner of that Baron is a friend of ours, and we still work with him. His approach to certifying was a little bit different than ours, and that has caused some schedule stuff and some material stuff. And there is a difference, even though let's say it's an STC that is similar in nature, installing the same equipment, when it's under, let's say, our application versus a completely third party, it changes a lot of things. And so we've learned over the past few years, and so that actually, yeah, I can't even speak to the status of that Baron, but we do have plans to bring the Autopilot and the kind of uncommitted plans and just the system at large into twins. So the Seneca's first, that'll come with Autopilot. And then from there, you can imagine we're going to start marching down the list of other twins, and the Baron is one of the most popular. So there's, I wouldn't just say some hope, there's a lot of hope there, but it isn't one that we've committed to right now.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Chick. All right, let's see, back to my list. So bits and pieces and installation. All right, so now I'm gonna decouple this. Let's get back to the panel view. Thank you. All right, so now we're gonna kind of talk about like what makes up a SkyView system. So here we've got, kind of on the panel, if you have a Dynon certified, you'll have 1 or 2 displays and an Ifr D10A. If you're experimental, you can still, install the D10A as a backup or anything else you want. And here's the panels that I talked about previously. And you would often have either our intercom, which is basically a 2-place intercom. That's not this. It looks, I don't have it in this panel, but it's the size of one of these with a couple knobs for squelch and volume. But or an audio panel. We like the PS Engineering ones. We like the IFDs. Of course, we have our biases. We work with all the major stuff. And then around the back of the panel, this is what an installation would look like these days. There's not a ton of wiring, and there's not a ton of bits and pieces. So the displays themselves have a 37-pin connector, which has like most of the wiring, and then these 2 9-pin connectors, which are what are called SkyView Network. And what SkyView Network is, oh, by the way, the display is kind of the computer, of the whole system. So you have modules that have sensors and other subsystems, but all the horsepower is in the display. There's no box that's the computing module anywhere. What's nice about that is when you do have 2, you have full redundancy, and they're set up so that like if one stops working or you power it down, either one can take the full load of managing the system. And from your perspective, it's transparent, how they're interacting. It's just a system, and it has 1, 2, or 3 displays. So SkyView Network is this 9-pin connector, which is, if you're a nerd type, is what most people would think is like a serial connection. It's not serial in this case. I mean, it is serial, but it's not RS-232. It's a dual redundant data and power network that has 2 pairs of wires for both of those functions. That's really nice because let's say you have your cables routed through the airplanes, and over time, one of them starts getting some interference with a rib or something, and the wire, something frays the wire. SkyView will recognize that as long as it all doesn't go at the same time. But like as the first data wire goes and say, ooh, I just lost like data bus A or B. Let me warn you about it. Preserve all the function because we just switched to the other if it was the active one. And then SkyView also has in one of its setup menus a way where it tells you like, hey, there's a problem between this, and this. And so if there's a problem between, say, this, and this, and I've got things connected where, let's say it's, it might tell me that, oh, it's this wire because I'm seeing problems on all of these things. So you have to think about a little bit how things are connected, but it's a lot easier than, say, like having to take apart every single connector and figure out where the broken wire is. You can narrow it down with SkyView's help. And so SkyView Network, all of the panel mounted things have 2 of these ports, so you can daisy chain them together, so it makes wiring real easy. And we have pre-made harnesses in all kinds of lengths, all the way down from, I think it's 6 inches now, up to 25 feet. Maybe there's even 30, I forget exactly what the range is, but you can get them in all kinds of sizes. We even have harnesses now for transponder and Comm Radio. Let me show you some of the bits and pieces, the actual bits and pieces. So displays, this is the backup battery. And we're the only system that has a built-in backup or a backup battery that it connects directly to the display, so that and to keep the primary functions alive, like your flight instruments and engine instruments and map, in the event of an electrical failure. So you can use your, let's say, an alternator failure is probably the most realistic reason that would happen. And so then SkyView has about an hour of power by itself, so you can use your aircraft battery for your radios and some of those higher current draw devices and the transponder. So other bits and pieces, so that's the backup battery. This is the back shells of the autopilot control panel, the things that we were demonstrating. Then these 2 guys, that's the ARINC module. So if you have an Ifr Navigator, this is what we call the SV ARINC 429. It has the ARINC chip that lets us talk to your Avidyne or Garmin box. This is the ADAHRS. So this is all of your flight instruments. It's got a magnetometer. It's got the pneumatic ports for angle of attack, pitot, and static. There is an optional dedicated magnetometer, which looks just like this. But if you have ideally this needs to be in a place, not on the wingtip, but somewhere like kind of inboard on the airplane. In an RV, you'll typically put it behind the rear baggage bulkhead. But if you do, but you also, the ADAHRS wants to be in a place that's kind of benign magnetically. And for some airplanes, that's just not a possibility. So there's a remote magnetometer that you can get remoted from the ADAHRS if you want. It looks just like this. I don't have one in the panel here. The engine monitor module, this is all of your thermocouple connectors, your CHTs and EGTs, and this is everything else. There again we have both harnesses and pre-configured packs where everything's color-coded, sensors and wires and everything. For mounting everything to your engine. The Comm Radio itself, even though the head is up here, the Comm Radio itself is a transceiver box, and the transponder is a transceiver box. So they have your BNC or TNC antennas to go out to the world, and then the connectors to connect them to SkyView through a different harness. And so SkyView makes use of, if you're kind of a nerdy type, so SkyView Network. Many, but not all of the Dynon produced components talk SkyView Network, and then things like the transponder and the ADSB in module, they talk serial, as well as some of those other third-party devices we were talking about, like the SL30. And so that kind of covers the. Oh, and this is a tray that was initially produced for certified installations that kind of have a nice platform for mounting. We're not yet marketing it into home build, and there's actually a new version of it eventually coming out that's just more broadly compatible. But one of the things that we realized over time, and one of the things that makes Dynon a lot different, than other people, we have all these harnesses. We're realizing that installation time, especially in certified, even for home builders, is a big deal. So if you can just get the harnesses, plug and play them, and hook up engine sensors versus having to build these, that cuts a lot of time and planning and hours off of your build ultimately. And we realize that for certified as well. We're even going as far these days to include little nuts and bolts and stuff, so that you don't even have to do that separately. And we're doing more and more of that as well. If you want to even a step better than that, our sister company, Advanced Flight Systems, so Dynon, we coupled with Advanced Flight Systems, I guess it was 5 or 6 years ago now. They make a similar line of EFISs that use all the same backgate components with different displays, real similar functionality. Ours are wide, theirs are tall, so different form factor. But they also have another new product, which is called Advanced Panel. And what advanced panel is you know, we build you a panel. It comes ready, you know, kind of mounted, you know, to the metal to rivet into your airplane with pre-configured harnesses, all the settings set up, and then featuring what we call our advanced control module. And what the advanced control module is kind of a wiring hub that enables those plug and play harnesses to truly just, you know, snap together. It also has electronic circuit breakers, or you can get a version with conventional fuses. And it additionally has all of a couple of different the ARINC module and some of the other electronics built in. So it's kind of a consolidation of wiring harness, aircraft systems management, power management through through your electronic circuit breakers. And the electronic circuit breakers are of course managed by the EFIS, or at least you can control them by the EFIS. And then they do wire. You can assign things to physical switches as well. So that's pretty neat. And so that is another product, and you can have an advanced panel built with either Dynon screens or advanced screens, and they work with you to tailor a panel to your needs. And so that's an option too if you want to reduce the workload even further than what we do just out of the box if you were to order a la carte. So let's see. I think I've kind of hit all of the things I want to hit, and we are at 6 o'clock. I guess I'm done with my canned presentation. I am happy to stick around for as long as anybody wants to chat. So if anybody has any questions, raise your hand. Otherwise, thanks for coming. We are going to be doing these, I'm hoping at least weekly. Some will be these virtual booth visits where we kind of go through the demo. We'll do some that are very topic specific. We have some ideas for just having, like a hangar happy hour where a few of us from Dynon will just, literally sit down with a beer and we'll just talk about, whatever you want to talk about. So frequently asked questions, some tech support oriented stuff. We've got a lot of ideas in the hopper. So if you're, I think we only broadcasted this on Facebook and email, but make sure you like our page so you see our events on Facebook. Make sure you're signed up for our newsletter because we send things that way too. And yeah, that's all I've got on the program.
Mike, we've got a few hands raised right now. If you want to take a couple questions.
Cool, sounds good.
All right, Bill, you're up next. I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, 3 questions real quick. I know that Advanced has an OEM version of a PS Engineering audio panel, probably serial controlled. Are you guys going to adopt that?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is yes. SkyView has so SkyView's architecture is a little bit different. So we do this very clever thing in SkyView that actually gives you a lot of redundancy, which is that each SkyView display has 5 serial ports. Each of those serial ports, so the way a serial port normally works is you can only transmit, or you can only listen to one thing at a time. You can talk to multiple things, but you can only hear from one at a time. But what we do with SkyView is we smartly shut off one screen serial ports, or at least the transmitters from it, so that to not screw up the communications with other devices. What that gets us or gains us is redundancy. So if you have 2 displays and one of them shuts off, fails, you don't lose any capability because the serial ports, everything's connected to both of them in parallel, and the system can manage that. So it's a nice little redundancy capability. What it does mean is that we only have 5 serial ports in SkyView. And so when you have, in a system that would have an audio panel serially controlled, you actually are already out of serial ports. So that's the main reason that we haven't implemented it. So because even if we did implement it, the software which exists on the advanced side, and a lot of the code is now shared, that's not the hard part. The hard part is like you would instantly say like, oh, I have an IFR capable airplane with the PS remote audio panel, but I can't use it because all my serial ports are spoken for already. And so that's the technical challenge there. All that said, it's on our roadmap to fix that because it's a great feature, and Mark shares, the PS Engineering panel, the remote mounted panels are really cool.
My second question moves right into that. Some of us are not using EMS. but there are some things that are essentially general purpose I/O, like is the baggage door open, is the canopy locked, that sort of thing.
Right.
So is it anywhere on the roadmap where there'd be like an SV expander that might have some general purpose I/O and maybe even some additional serial ports?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of going down the thought path of what a technical solution to that limitation would look like, and there's nothing set in stone, but you've kind of got the right idea, or at least your thinking aligns with what we would do for general purpose stuff. The engine monitor module, it probably doesn't make sense if you just want to monitor one or two things, but you could. That's probably that is a box that has a whole bunch of general purpose inputs, whether the temperatures or just micro switches you want to monitor, but it is tied to that engine page. So I admit I don't suspect it will change that drastically. There are a few general purpose inputs on SkyView, not general purpose inputs, but like contact inputs, things like switches. They don't sense temperature and stuff, and 2 or 3 of those are kind of reserved or hard mapped right now to things like level button, yaw damper, engage, disengage. And I think 1 or 2 of them are unspoken. I forget if there's like 4 and 2 or 3 are allocated. And in the future, it's not necessarily on a roadmap, but the adjust software again, one could make those more flexible, but we don't have any commitment to that. That's sort of the full story there too.
It's just software, so you take the software engineer's estimate, double it, and move it up to the next value. So if he says an hour, it's a day.
Well, our team is really good at, we follow a Scrum model internally, and that's, they're really good at estimating their velocity and performing to that. And so I can't complain about that. But what we can collectively complain about is we literally have thousands of features in our backlog of things that customers have requested or things that we'd like to do, and getting to all of them is literally impossible. So we're always prioritizing, and we are like any company, we have to prioritize. We have limited resources, and so we do the things that we think that will make the most impact to the most people, and try to get in some of the fun things that are that are innovative as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Now looks like we got Ken.
Hello, yeah. This kind of follows along to what I talked about a little bit earlier. I can read a schematic. Many years ago, I was an engineer. I can read a schematic and follow directions, and I became far, far more intimate with the SkyView installation manual than any person has a right to be. And I built a lot of my harnesses following the diagrams in the installation manual. And then I started getting into the Avidyne manual, and for my personal installation, I chose as a standby attitude indicator a Garmin G5 because it's a totally different software ecosystem. God forbid I discovered that one bug in the software, I'll still have something lit up to get me out of the sky. But the thing about it is this: I built a rather extensive harness to go between the IFD 540 and the SV AirInc 429. The Link interface module. Then I started getting into the schematics and diagrams for both the Garmin and the IFD. They shield all their AirInc lines and all their RS-232 lines. None of the schematics in the Dynon manual show them shielded. They only show audio lines shielded.
Yeah.
Whose decision was it to do that?
Yeah. The engineers is the generic answer. I don't have a precise memory, although I'm an old timer here. But I do know one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that RS-232 is crazy robust, especially in an airplane environment. And I think some of that was eliminating complexity, in wiring and especially when people are building their own harnesses where it isn't perhaps strictly necessary. So I can't speak to all of the decision making there. I'm not sure if that's changed in certified. I do know that our documentation is getting a pretty big revamp, especially on the certified side, and that'll filter over to the experimental side. And
yeah, I saw you had twisted pairs on the 5 RS-232 ports, but no shielding.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not an electrical engineer. I was once upon a time.
Neither am I.
Yeah, I was a CS guy in my computer science in a degree in a previous life. So electrons aren't my thing. Bits more are, but I think it had to do with like that the twisted pair in those situations does a really good job of eliminating the sort of interference that you would encounter in an airplane in those wires, and the shielding has less value there. But if there are any EEs in here, you may be telling me that I'm wrong, and you're probably right. But so I don't have a comprehensive.
I just read the schematic and do what it says. That's all I know how to do.
With audio, it's super important. You know, that's one reason that we now actually make an intercom comm radio harness to eliminate those sorts of troubleshooting of weird noises that you're hearing that are coming through RF interference and other induced signals.
Yeah, I'm just one more person that puts this hand up. Please make an expansion module for more RS-232 ports, because
Yeah.
I've got Dynon transponder, Dynon ADS-BN, a GPS 2020, and a backup GPS 250. And guess what? My one lonely RS-232 port is now talking to a third-party VHF nav radio, and that's
Right.
it. I'm out. You know, so there's one more hand for an expansion module.
I hear your vote. and to be honest, it's always interesting. Not that, I mean, when we hear something in person, like at the show, and when we hear a trend, like, oh, we really need more serial ports, and we already know we do. That makes a difference, actually. So that's why we like having these conversations, whether they're virtually or at Sun and Fun or Oshkosh or the other fly-ins.
I'll give you just one good example how that could help. Okay, I have an ELT that's capable of taking a GPS signal and sending my position. God forbid I should go down. But I have no nav ports left, or excuse me, RS-232 ports to port that GPS signal over to the to the ELT. That kind of thing.
Now,
everything else these days.
Yeah, and one thing you can do in some configurations is some devices only use the receive side to get things into SkyView, and then you can set the out to a different function, like let's say in the MIA GPS out, and that doesn't work in every, because the baud rate has to match usually 9600.
Well, it's all in the configuration, absolutely.
Yeah. So and all that. And actually, that's cool. I'm just for the first time actually looking at going to gallery view because I was trying to manage the actual presentation. There's a bunch of cool backgrounds going on. Yeah. Still 50 of you in here. Oh, that's awesome. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions?
If you have any questions that didn't get answered in the chat, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you and you can talk to Mike.
All right. I think that's going to wrap it up. I didn't go through the sort of like how to buy and what everything costs and all of that. There's the most useful thing. We have an online price list and all of that, but the most useful thing that's pretty comprehensive and even gives you sort of how to stack things up is our catalog. And so if you go to the literature section on our website, that has all the pricing, like what everything does. I mean, go to the website and just see all that stuff individually. But if you want just like a few examples of like if you had a VFR, 1-panel, 2-panel IFR, it just has like a list of all the stuff that you would buy. That also has, unfortunately, we're not all going to show, so we can't just hand them to you, but it has real size cutouts of displays if you just want to kind of mock things up. They are PDFs, so as long as you print those catalogs without any reduction or scaling, you'll actually get measure them, but you'll get real size cutouts of the displays and modules.
Looks like we have another question, Mike, from Jim.
Yeah, what's up, Jim?
Yeah, Mike, just a quick comment for you. The question about the twisted pair, it really depends upon the number of twists per inch. The Cat5, for example, Cat5 cables used to come twisted at the one twist per, I'm not saying that right, at one set number of twists per inch. And when they went to Cat6, the only thing that really changed in the cable was the number of twists per inch. So as you speed up the data rate over the serial lines, you need more twists in the cable. So that's kind of the short answer.
Okay.
To that. Yep.
I appreciate that. Thanks. All right. Let's see. We've also got Jamie.
Unmute now. Yeah, a couple questions. First one, are you considering doing like a iPad trainer similar to like what Avidyne has?
We consider all of those things, but in terms of kind of bigger products, whether it's a trainer or a simulator, we really don't talk about things like that until they're kind of in launch mode. But training is on our mind, and frankly, the thing you'll see first are more video content and things like this. There are, yeah, that's all I can really say about that. But we're considering all of those things.
Okay. Then the second question, I'm actually my system's being installed at the moment. I just took it in, but I have 182 with an STEC 50. Will I be able to use the heading mode off the Dynon through the STEC 50?
No, yeah, unfortunately not. So there won't be any integration with them the way they're certified. I don't know what the STEC might be able to take in terms of like data from our system. But I think the truthful answer is it can't, because they would have needed to build software to specifically support us, and we just haven't played in the same space.
Right.
For example, if you had a true track, like the certified true track, like it can accept. It accepts the bugs, but you don't have any control of the modes. In other words, as far as SkyView cares, there's no autopilot on board. Mm-hmm. But in systems that can receive the information, if you spin the heading knob or the altitude, and that other product is accepted or is set up to accept that data, you can basically fly the heading and altitude bugs.
Right.
But with the STEC, that's not going to be a possibility, unfortunately.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. And we've got next up is Mark.
Hey, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, I've got my current installation has two D700 7-inch displays and a tandem cockpit. Couldn't fit anything more to get dual displays. But having already been prior to Dynon with another EFIS vendor that went out of business, I'm on my second panel, and I'm worried there doesn't seem to be an upgrade path, or I start worrying about support for 7-inch displays. What's going on there?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a difference between, support, and so as I mentioned, if we are likely to have a SkyView Classic to HDX upgrade path, trade-in type something at some point, no time frame promised there. And what we have said with SkyView Classic publicly, I don't know if it's written down on our website, but it's not a secret, is that the future development of SkyView is going to happen on HDX. We just have to prioritize different platforms. All that said, I think every feature in the last 3 years now since HDX has come out has made it back to Classic as well. That won't always be the case. There are some hardware differences between SkyView Classic and the user interface that make it harder to do things on the Classic interface than it is on HDX. And so kind of like prime development will be on HDX only in terms of feature. Now, all that said, bug fixes, support, long-term support of the equipment, that's all online and will be, conceivably for the future. In fact, we just discontinued our first generation of products, most of them anyway, kind of quietly and gradually over time as some of the components have gone end of life. For example, the D100, the D120, the D180, those screens became unavailable. They've been out for 15 years. And now that doesn't mean we can't support them. Like, we will support them for years to come, even though we're not selling them as new. We can still repair them. That'll be the case true for those products. And with SkyView Classic, we're still selling them, right? So they are less expensive these days compared to SkyView HDX. There are thousands of them in the field. So there's, you know, and as we know, as we've learned, and is our philosophy, like taking care and supporting our customers in a long-term way is like the best marketing we can do, frankly, you know, more than any advertising. And, you know, if you're not happy, you're not going to tell your friend that, you know, in your EAA chapter to buy Dynon. And so we know that we need to find a balance and not just orphan products and say, oh, you got to buy the new one, or oops, we can't repair it. You know, so we try not to do that. So I don't know if that's reassuring or not, but that's our position.
Well, it's just concerning that if I have a failure in a D700.
Oh no, I mean, again, we still sell them new. They're fully repairable. Okay. They're not being discontinued, you know, anytime soon. So, and even once they're discontinued, well, I'll give you an example. Our original product, the Ifr D10, that's the predecessor to the Ifr D10A that we sell today, was only out for about a year. We had an upgrade path from that was pretty low cost that we persisted for like a decade after we discontinued it. So the D10 came out in 2003, the D10A came out in 2004, and we were upgrading them. We upgraded most of the fleet actually, you know, for like a decade after. Even once we stopped the upgrade program, we had a trade-in program, which we just quietly retired, you know, for those original customers that had a product that we weren't able to support in the repair sense, but that we were able to provide an equivalent that was, you know, an equivalent. The D10A was the same as the D10 with just some newer hardware. So, you know, we don't have a firm, like, let's say like life cycle plan that would say like, you know, it's you know, discontinue plus X years, but that's the sort of model to think about. Like, SkyView is not even discontinued at this point, and then there'll be years to go after that we'll be able to support them with repairs and you know, bug fixes and stuff.
But is there any plans for a 7-inch, you know, something in that size in the future?
Well, there's a 7-inch version of SkyView HDX.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So, so the current portfolio of products are, so SkyView HDX is the flagship. It comes in a 10-inch and a 7.
Okay.
And then SkyView Classic, which is what you have, that comes in a 10-inch and a 7.
Yeah.
And then SkyView SE, which looks just like a Classic, it just has slightly different software. That also comes in it's like a kind of a mapless, synthetic visionless version of SkyView Classic for real simple airplanes, or for simple missions, you know, where that's the same thing as Classic, 10 and 7. So actually everything is available in both form factors right now.
Okay. Sorry, that added to my worries, and I should have known that. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, so we still sell yours in 7-inch. We still sell its successor in 7-inch. And as I mentioned, there is, even once, like one day we will discontinue SkyView Classic. I don't know what the day is. It could be years away. You'll have an upgrade path. You know, even if we didn't have a trade-in program, you'd be able to swap them. They're almost drop-in replacements.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it looks like, all right, I think that's, no other hands raised?
Bueller.
Yeah, give it another few seconds for anybody that wants to raise their hand. Actually, what I'll do is, how do I unmute everybody? Is there a way to do that? Does anybody know?
Yep, I can do it, Mike.
Yeah, unmute everybody. People can just shout out what they want for the last minute or two.
Here we go. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, it was nice talking to all of you today. I think this went pretty well. If you have any thoughts on what we could do different or better, or things that you didn't like, or if it was annoying to do the hand raising, does anybody have any thoughts on the actual content of what we should do more of, less of, or format?
I thought it was great, Mike.
We need to get some answers to the chats that were listed.
Yeah,
we were trying to answer those chat questions as fast as we could. They were coming in awful quick.
Oh, yeah, I guess.
What,
All right. Well,
one thing I've noticed is you did the knob panel and then you recently did the radio for quick 5-minute lessons. Those are awesome. Keep doing that. Like I said, mine's being installed as we speak, so hopefully you'll get my 182 in about 3 weeks. All that's going to help me as a new user. Yeah, those quick 5-minute, 10-minute trainings, awesome.
Yeah, thanks for the feedback. And Kyle, who's the star of those, he's on here. He's been answering some of your questions today.
Trying to anyway.
And he's one of he's on our sales team, and we borrow him sometimes for marketing to do stuff like this. And you'll see him at air shows when we get back to doing that, and you'll see him a lot more in those videos. And we plan to continue to expand the portfolio, as much as we can on those videos. There aren't any other questions. I guess we'll sign off for tonight, and see you guys next time. Thanks for spending the time. Thanks for spending. Some of you have been here for 2.5 hours, which is it's fun. Maybe I'll tighten it up next time.
Still less time than they might have spent at Oshkosh.
That's right.